Period. 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 Yeah. Period.
Hello, litigators and opinionators. Court is now in session. My gosh, every time I think we're going to take a break from the BRYAN KOHBERGER case, more information keeps spilling out. So today, a lot has happened today. It appears as though the prosecutor went to the court and advocated to unseal the search warrants involved. And so there was some interesting information that was discovered during the search of BRYAN's apartment. Based upon the information we looked at in relation to BRYAN's office at his school, there doesn't appear to be anything that was found at this time based upon the warrant. So let's look at the search warrant of the apartment to see what was discovered. Now, this is an 18-page search warrant, and a lot of the information previously just relates to the scope of the search and why the officers are asking for that scope and what in particular they're asking to look for and how it relates to the charges at hand. But the more pertinent information that I believe we should discuss is page 17 here, where it was filed, it appears to be January 3rd of this year, so recently. And they have the case number here and the search warrant and the date that the search warrant was issued and the date the search warrant was served, which was December 30th. And it was served by Chief Don Daniels, and we know him very well. But let's look at the items that was found in BRYAN's house or apartment to see if you guys think any of this information does strengthen the prosecution's case. Now, a lot of this information is just basically the preliminary information because they haven't tested some of these stains that were discovered to see if the stains are blood stains from one of the victims. So that is something that is still unknown. So some of the items that were discovered in BRYAN's apartment was one nitrate type black glove. Now that is interesting. We know that BRYAN allegedly was wearing gloves everywhere he went, but the fact that the color of it was really significant to me. It was a black glove. And Dylan talks about noticing that the individual that came in her house was wearing all black and he had thick eyebrows. So I'm starting to question whether BRYAN wore gloves when he committed this crime. And this black glove to me could shed light. Or it could be that he just had a bunch of black gloves that he was going around wearing because, again, there was witnesses that saw him wear these black gloves, or at least the investigators saw him wearing the black gloves, or not black gloves, wearing surgical gloves in the grocery stores and other places. So the black glove to me seems quite significant. One Walmart receipt with one Dickies tag. Now, it's interesting that they retained the Walmart receipt and the two Marshalls receipts. That's quite interesting and monumental because the fact that they chose to keep these particular receipts tells me that there were some very incriminating items that BRYAN bought. Okay, maybe it may be a receipt related to the shoes that he bought to wear the crime, or clothing, the black clothing that he bought to the crime and he wore to the crime scene. So that was very significant that they seized these receipts. That tells me there were some incriminating items that he bought. And one of the reasons why the law enforcement retrieved and seized these receipts. Now, number 4, they seized the dust container from the Bissell Power Force vacuum. Now, we know that BRYAN never sleeps at night. And one of the interesting things that his neighbor said is that he's constantly vacuuming. So my opinion is the reason why they seized this dust container is because while BRYAN was very meticulously trying to clean his house to ensure none of the victim's DNA was ever left in that house. Well, while he was vacuuming, he may have vacuumed some hair particles that was left on his clothing, or blood particles, or whatever, DNA items. So that is very monumental why the law enforcement retained the dust container. Only thing is, we don't know what, if anything, this information has produced because, again, We are waiting for the results, and law enforcement has not disclosed those results. They seized 8 possible hair strands. That's pretty monumental. Hair strands. So I wonder if one of these hair strands belonged to either Kaylee's dog or one of the Idaho 4. Very monumental. I'm pretty sure these hair strands were taken in for testing. The only question is, what were the results? Number 6 is one Fire TV stick with cord and plug. That one I had questions about. I wonder if you guys could kind of theorize, what do you think and why they seized the Fire TV stick? Maybe he watches very violent PORN and that can go towards his mindset. I don't know. That's kind of interesting though. One possible animal hair strand. Ooh, the animal hair strand is very monumental because we know that Kaylee had a dog. I think the animal strand is also significant because remember, just a couple weeks ago, a dog was cut up and skinned only 3 miles away from the Idaho Forest Place. So I'm wondering, again, I think that the law enforcement dropped the ball on that case. I don't think they're even investigating it, but I really wish they would test any dog hair related to that dog that was unalived, plus the dog at Kaylee's house. But that's pretty significant because if that hair strand, a dog hair strand belongs to Kaylee's dog, gonna be monumental. But again, there's a big question as to the connection BRYAN had to the Idaho 4 in that, did he ever go to any of those parties? Because he might argue, oh, I have the animal hair strand because I went to one of the parties and the dog was there. So again, that can be refuted. There's one possible hair, and another possible hair strand. So it looks like they have 1, 2, 3, 4 different hair strands. Again, this is going to be very interesting to find out if these hair strands belong to any of the Idaho 4. That could be pretty monumental. But again, it may not be if there's any evidence that BRYAN attended any of these parties. And if he claims that as a defense and there's proof of it, that's problematic. One computer tower, and we don't know what's in there, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be tearing down and searching that computer information. One collection of dark red spot collected without testing. Dark red spot. Ooh, now that sounds quite incriminating. But again, we shall never know until they test the dark red spot to see what it is. 2 cuttings from uncased pillow of reddish brown stain. Large stain tested. Now, this large stain was tested, but they didn't tell us the results. So I wonder if it's just a red herring. They didn't find anything. Who knows? 2 top and bottom of mattress covered packaged separately, both labeled C. Multiple stains. 1 tested. Wow, multiple stains. Either BRYAN is really dirty and he has a lot of stains on his stuff, or this stains could belong to one of the Idaho 4. We have not been given that information as to what the results are. So with this pieces of information, the pieces of items that they seized from BRYAN's house, we'll know whether or not it's incriminating. But at the same time, I kind of expected them to find more. I'm just saying. I did. But it seems like BRYAN did clean up pretty well. Not well enough. If any of these hair strands, it looked like there's 8 possible hair strands that were retrieved here too. There's a lot of strands. There's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 hair strands that they obtained. So it'll be interesting to figure out if any of these are associated with the Idaho 4. But again, they have to really establish whether or not BRYAN had any connections, because if he was in that house, he's going to argue that, oh, I was in the house, I sat down, I had drinks. That's probably how it got in my house. So that's going to be quite interesting. But if they show that he had no type of connection and never been in that house, and only connection is that he kept repeatedly Instagramming one of these Idaho 4, which is the new allegation that BRYAN was Instagramming one of the girls, messaging her repeatedly. And these messages were apparently going into one of her boxes, one of the request box, meaning she's not following him. So that's very significant evidence, in my opinion, showing there's really no direct communication with this guy, because she's not even following him on Instagram, whoever the victim is that he was DMing. I feel it was Kaylee that he was messaging profusely. I personally feel he had an obsession with Kaylee. That's my theory. And I'm holding fast on that theory until we figure out what happens in the court. But with these 12 or 13, 14, 15 pieces of evidence. What do you guys think? Do you think it's going to be significant? I guess at this time, it's not really significant until we figure out what the results are. What did any of these hair strands, were they matched to or connected to any of the Idaho 4? What about the I said blood stains. What about the red stains? The reddish brown stains. Was it just Bryan being nasty and dirty and not cleaning his sheets? Or are those reddish brownish stains blood? And that's kind of disgusting if they are. Like, why would he be sleeping in the victim's blood? That's, ugh. I mean, he didn't clean up well. Ew. Okay. Enough of that. So you guys let me know what you think about these pieces of evidence and what, if anything, you think is monumental about it. I think the receipts are pretty monumental. They obviously seized those because there are some incriminating items Bryan bought. I think the black glove is incriminating. Of course, the hair and their stark spots are pending until we figure out if they're linked to the victims. And I'm very interested in finding out what's found in the dust container, because that could be a very huge treasure trove of a bunch of DNA evidence, because when he's vacuuming, he's not realizing he's vacuuming all that DNA and hair particles and everything that he thinks he's cleaning up, but it's just being collected into that dust container. So that could be a treasure trove for the prosecution. Pretty interested in finding out what, if anything, this information shows to incriminate him. If any of these test positive for Idaho 4, that's really going to lock him in, unless he tries to wiggle his way out again and say he's been in that house and he knows them. But the red blood stains, that's going to really solidify him. If these are considered red, if these are considered blood stains, that's going to really lock him in. Now, guys, there has been a new article that has come out about this case that has shed light on how law enforcement may have possibly obtained the DNA sample. Now, we already know that they obtained a DNA sample from the garbage of the KOHBERGER's family residence when Bryan tried to sneak out about 3 or 4 in the morning to put the trash in his neighbor's trash. But the question was, because there was allegations that law enforcement used some type of genealogy, ancestry type website to match up this evidence, because they didn't have Bryan KOHBERGER's DNA. Well, one of Bryan KOHBERGER's neighbors literally told on Bryan. Okay. Bryan was talking to one of his neighbors, talking too much per usual, because that's one of the indications that some of the neighbors say, is that he talks a lot. And he told on himself, guys. He told his neighbor that he took one of those prior DNA tests to find out what his ancestry was. Can you believe it? He literally gave up his DNA to one of the ancestry websites. So that's where law enforcement got his DNA from, and then matched it and linked it to his father, the DNA that was found in the garbage at their neighbor's residence, where Bryan tried to think he was sneaky and put the trash in his neighbor's. So let's read this article. Isn't this crazy, y'all? What? KOHBERGER told neighbor of prior DNA test, raising questions about how police found him. Isn't that crazy, guys? Oh my gosh. He literally just handed the law enforcement his DNA. Bryan KOHBERGER told a fellow Washington State University graduate student living in the same on-campus housing complex that he submitted his DNA for consumer genetic testing to explore his ancestry, the neighbor told the Idaho Statesman. Wow, guys. Bryan literally gave up his DNA in one of those ancestry websites, y'all. And that's how law enforcement was able to get his DNA. They used that DNA to link it back to his dad, and that's how they figured out their evidence. Isn't that crazy? He literally told his neighbor that he used that DNA website. KOHBERGER, 28, was a PhD student in Washington State University's Criminal Justice and Criminology Department. He now stands charged with the possible unalives of these 4 victims in the felony burglary. KOHBERGER's neighbor said the two became acquainted while crossing paths on the residential property a handful of times after they each moved in their residence in August. The Washington State University PhD student lives across from the apartment where KOHBERGER resided until recently, and he said the two traded cell phone numbers. Seems like Bryan was trying to get him some friends, y'all. In their longest interaction on the first Friday night of the fall semester, they spent about an hour chatting, the man said. The spaceman agreed to grant him an anonymity over privacy concerns to publish his account of his exchanges with Bryan Kohberger, because he don't want to be nowhere linked to Bryan, so he wanted to be anonymous, including that conversation months before Kohberger was arrested. So this is months before Kohberger was arrested. He did this ancestry.com. So that had to probably have been, back in August when he told his neighbor that, because that's when they first moved in. He became acquainted with the area. They exchanged numbers. So I am guessing, guys, and speculating that he might have told this neighbor about submitting his DNA to this ancestry website back in August, which in my opinion means that when he did initially submit that DNA, he wasn't thinking about committing a crime. So this thought of him committing the crime may have arose around the time that he did that Reddit survey, y'all, and then was looking for his victim when he came to Washington State University and laid eyes, in my opinion, upon Kaylee. And I believe he met Kaylee at the Cougar Bar in Washington, because that Cougar Bar is a bar that she would attend. She actually went there for her 21st birthday. It's near the Washington State University. Bryan frequents a lot of bars based upon some of the neighbors who said they saw him, or some of the owners of bars in that area. And a brewery came out and said that he went to their bar. Also in Pennsylvania, he's gone to bars. So it's not far-fetched that he might have gone to the Cougar Bar and saw Kaylee there. And that's when he developed his obsession with her, started stalking her. And then subsequently, I speculate that those DM messages that he was sending to one of the Idaho 4 on Instagram, in my opinion, was probably messages he was sending to Kaylee and had garnered this obsession with her. I'm starting to think he possibly was her stalker. Again, these are just my theories and opinions. In their longest interaction on the first Friday night of the fall semester, they spent about an hour chatting, the man said. See, look, they said in their longest interaction on the first Friday night of the fall semester. So that would have been around August. They spent an hour chatting, the man said. The statesman agreed to grant him anonymity. And that's why I'm speculating they talked in August, guys. Months before he was arrested. And here's a photo of where he was residing. We've seen this picture plastered everywhere. His apartment, the large on-campus housing. The August evening, the two grads ran into each other in the large housing complex parking lot next to their buildings. The man said during an interview at his apartment, Kohberger then asked him if he wanted to walk and talk. He said the two got to know each other a little while taking laps around the asphalt parking lot. During their discussion, Kohberger asked their neighbor, who is not from the U.S., whether he could identify Kohberger's ancestral background, the man said. The neighbor said he guessed Italy before Kohberger stated that he was of German descent. He talked about his ancestors, the 30-year-old neighbor said. He had some sort of DNA test. I don't know how he got to that point. It was just interesting to him. So, right, he literally gave his DNA away, guys, which is where I think the law enforcement got it from. The detail could shed new light on growing reports that investigators use public genealogy database to land on Kohberger as the alleged killer. Citing law enforcement sources, multiple news outlets, including Fox News, CNN, and ABC News, reported as early as the day after Kohberger's arrest that police employed the forensic technique to narrow their focus to Kohberger, while making no mention of the contentious method in the probable cause affidavit used to justify taking into custody. Right, because law enforcement doesn't have to give the judge every single detail of what they did. They're only trying to give the judge just the bare minimum to rise to probable cause. So there's a lot, again, we don't know because they're not giving the judge every single detail. A single source of male DNA was recovered from the bottom snap of a KOHBERGER brand leather knife sheath found on the bed next to the body of one of the 4 victims, police said. Police later matched the DNA from trash discarded at the Kohberger home in eastern Pennsylvania, where Kohberger was visiting his family for winter break, to the profile taken from the knife sheath, according to the affidavit. However, investigators did not hone in on Kohberger and his search warrant for his cell phone data until after the investigative genetic genealogy results came back identifying him. See, that's what I think, guys. I think they used whatever website BRYAN used to give his DNA. They used that to find his DNA. He literally helped the law enforcement, thanks to him for submitting his DNA for ancestral research. And a law enforcement source with knowledge of the investigation told Slate this information. They used this investigative genetic genealogy results that came back identifying him. That's when they sought the search warrant for his cell phone data. So it looks like they already had BRYAN's direct DNA. They already had it, guys, before they obtained the DNA result from the father in Pennsylvania. It looks like they searched the genetic websites. They found a DNA match, what led back to BRYAN, which they found his direct DNA, in my opinion, from one of those websites he used. And then after they did that, they had matched BRYAN up to the sheaf already. I'm thinking way back in December or late November, they already had done this genetic genealogy test. But they knew that wasn't strong enough evidence. That evidence has not been used in the court of law in any form of testimony. So they didn't tell the judge that. What they did was they already linked him up. They didn't even notify the judge about the genetic genealogy. But that genetic genealogy already positively identified BRYAN because they used his direct DNA that he submitted to one of those Ancestry.com websites. And again, I'm not sure if he used Ancestry.com, but whatever website he used, in my opinion, that's how law enforcement first was able to get a match on the DNA. Now, after they got that match, that's when they really started pursuing BRYAN. When they eventually get to his Pennsylvania house and BRYAN tries to think he's slick, y'all, and try to hide the garbage in his neighbor's garbage. Well, then the law enforcement wanted more solid, direct DNA. So that's why they obtained and seized his garbage so that they can have a direct DNA hit. And once they tested it, it came back 99.9% match of the father. So that's my opinion as to how they did that. I think they already had a DNA match before they even tested, you guys. Before they even tested the DNA found in the garbage in Pennsylvania. Way before that. Way before that. They're just not going to put that in an arrest warrant because it's not really solid evidence. Genetic genealogy, it's been used to crack a lot of cases, but it's never been used in the court of law as solid evidence. So they knew they needed a little bit something more solid in their search warrant. So guys, let's take a look there. I want to get a little bit more details about this search warrant that's going on here. So this, as the items that were seized, the investigator listed reasons why they requested a search warrant for KOHBERGER's home, stating that the King Road residence where Kaylee and the other four were unalived contained significant amount of blood from the victims, including spatter and cast-off blood stain patterns resulting from blood drops released from an object due to its motion. That was a bloody scene. They said significant amounts of blood from the victim. So they're saying because there was so much blood, there has to be some evidence that even though BRYAN may have cleaned up very meticulous as he tried to, there has to be some form of evidence to show it. Authorities say they believe it is likely that this evidence was transferred to KOHBERGER, who they believe returned to his apartment after the killings on November 13th. Because again, remember, they were able to track his driving when he turned that phone back on, according to the search warrant documents. At the time, it's likely that he still had blood or other trace evidence on his person, his clothes, his shoes, including skin cells or hair from the victims or from Gonzalez's dog, the search warrant application stated. So far, the weapon used, though, in the killings have not been found, as we've seen in the search warrant results. And it doesn't seem like the authorities found a monumental amount of evidence, in my opinion. I just was expecting them to find a lot more, considering how bloody that crime scene was. Gosh, it was hugely, very, very bloody scene. So that's what the attorneys, not the attorneys, but the law enforcement described the scene as very profusely bloody. Oh my God, it was horrendous, y'all. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the information or the evidence that was found. And do you think Bryan set himself up by doing this genealogy, given his DNA? Do you think he set himself up and literally helped the law enforcement out by giving them his DNA, or literally giving an Ancestry.com website his DNA, guys? How dumb can he be? But then that also makes me ask another question, guys. My question is, he says he did this Ancestry, website or DNA website to determine what his ancestry was. Well, if he did that, do you think Bryan initially had this intent, or was it some type of crime of passion as he initially described it to his neighbor? Did he just have a sudden flash of anger after repeated attempts to message one of the Idaho 4 women on Instagram, and they repeatedly ignored him in his mind, right? So did he just that enrage him and spin him off on this verge to unalive them? Within like probably the second week, because at least the first 2 weeks of November, or at least the beginning of November, before the killings, he was really actively messaging one of the Idaho 4 women. And I think it was Kaylee. So I'm wondering, did this anger just arise because of the repeated rejection in his mind, and him starting to have flashbacks of all the years of rejection and how all that came tumbling down in his mind, and he exerted all that anger towards this final woman who rejected him? He said, "No more. I will seek my final revenge." Like the bitter incel he is, in my opinion. And again, Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. Now, in the newly unveiled filings, investigators described previously undisclosed evidence they were seeking, including DNA. Let's see. Including DNA, blood, shoes with the diamond pattern soles. Remember, because they found that shoe print, and data compilations of information about the victims and the King Road house where they were killed. So that was some of the information they were seeking. It looks like they found some information, but notice how in that list, and I'm going to show you the list again, in the list of items that they found, guys, they didn't find the shoes. You notice that? They didn't find the shoes. That's pretty monumental to me, because it shows me that Bryan really took meticulous steps to get rid of all of the clothing, his shoes, everything, guys. They didn't find shoes. Notice this list does not include shoes. That is pretty significant. That means Bryan took subsequent steps to get rid of the shoes he wore that night. And he knew he had to get rid of those shoes because they had shown pictures of a shoe print that they were looking at as a form of evidence. So Bryan got rid of the shoe print, and the clothes he wore. He got rid of everything. So the highly anticipated warrants contain new details about what investigators found after they arrested the suspect, who had a master's degree in criminal justice. Warrants allege that Kohberger pre-planned the ambush and had studied other murderers and how to avoid detection as part of his preparations. Wow. And I wonder how they knew that. They said some details in the warrant, guys. That was some pretty detailed information in the warrant. That they said that Bryan had a significant preparation and that he studied other criminals before he did it. It said that he alleged that he pre-planned the ambush and had studied other murderers and how to avoid detection as part of his preparations. You see that? So I'm wondering, how did the law enforcement know that? That means they're not telling us everything in the warrant, of course. That means they have more information that was produced probably from the digital evidence that they found in Bryan's apartment that revealed that he had been doing extra studies to figure out how he can avoid being detected. So I am speculating that they have found some monumental searches on Bryan's electronics that are quite incriminating. Allegedly, based upon this detail of information that the law enforcement provided in their warrants. These murders appear to have been planned rather than a crime that happened in the moment of conflict, an affidavit seeking the warrant reads. But again, I wonder, when did BRYAN make that up in his mind he was going to commit these murders? Because at least a few weeks, or at least within the beginning of November, that's when he started actively messaging and DMing these girls. Or not these girls, one of the particular girls, y'all. Okay, one of the particular girls he was messaging. Who do you guys think it was? You think it was Kaylee, Zana, or Maddie? Let me know your theories and state your position for why you think that. So I'm wondering, what's that dark red spot and the two cuttings from the uncased pillow? That part is with the reddish brown stain. What? Was he sleeping in their blood, guys? That's disgusting. If it was blood. Now, they said, I'm sure by now they have the DNA on the human and animal hair and know exactly where they came from, said Joseph, a retired NYPD sergeant. Right, guys. And they're not going to disclose that to us because they don't want to compromise the evidence. But guys, if they found that hair that belongs to the Idaho 4 or the dog in that house, woo! Still, I wouldn't even, okay, I'm still going to say I don't feel that's solid enough, because he can argue who's at their house for parties. So that's why I think the evidence that'll make this case a really solid case is if they find blood belonging to one of the Idaho 4 in his house. If one of those red stains come back to be one of the Idaho 4, that to me is really strong evidence where BRYAN cannot wiggle himself out of the evidence. With just hair, he can argue all day that, oh, well, I just went over there for a party. That's how I got there or whatever. I sat on the couch or whatever, and they lived there. So obviously that's how I got their hair on me. And they all live in that apartment, they all live in that house. But if they test the stain that's on the pillowcase, that's on the sheets, and it comes back to be blood of one of the Idaho 4, they have locked him in. Because I'm still not convinced with all the evidence they have. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, this is a lot of evidence. I'm not convinced, because I feel like BRYAN can make up any explanation to wiggle himself out and explain the evidence away in a reasonable manner that would raise reasonable doubt. But if they find blood, he's done. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for blood that's linked to the Idaho 4. And that house was drenched in the victim's blood. So I want to see that these officers found blood, okay? But this NYPD says he thinks, and I agree with him, that they have DNA on human hair and animal hair and know exactly where they came from, Joseph says. Adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. If those hairs came back to any victim or the dog, they hit the jackpot. But again, I still don't feel they hit the jackpot if that hair comes back. I still don't, guys, because again, he can make an explanation. We already seen this happen with one of the trolls in that group who tried to claim BRYAN KOHBERGER was framed and that he was hanging out with a security guard near the house and doing drugs, and the security guard was doing a peeping Tom in their house, and he left him there with a knife, and then the security guard committed the crime. And the evidence fits so well together that a juror could possibly believe that and raise reasonable doubt. So again, this can still be an explanation where BRYAN can claim, well, you see me go over there 12 different times, and I went there during the night hour times when they're having parties. I went there for a party. The parties were pretty big. Maybe they didn't notice me because of how big the party was. Also, there's evidence from the body camera showing that the girls were not at the house one day when they had a party there. So how would they know that BRYAN was there? Again, he can argue that all day long. So I don't feel they hit the jackpot just because of some hair found. I feel they hit the jackpot if they find blood stains that belong to the Idaho 4. It needs to be blood. When I hear that they found one of the Idaho 4's blood in his house, in his car, that's the jackpot. That is the cliffhanger. That is the strong evidence that they need to really nail this man, okay? If he is found guilty, okay? They need blood. That's what they need. He added that the police had done an excellent job with the investigation and said that at this point, finding the murder weapon may not be necessary for conviction. Okay, yeah, but they need to find the blood. This place was a very bloody scene, okay? And the defense is going to argue, if they can't find one speck of blood belonging to the Idaho 4, they're going to argue this to the ground. They're going to say, This scene was a very bloody scene. The prosecution, the law enforcement, when they submitted the warrant, they made it a point to argue that there was a monumental amount of blood all over the crime scene, and that it was literally impossible for the suspect to have left that scene without any of that blood on him, which would, had been evidence somewhere in the car, evidence somewhere in the house. Okay. And my client, this is what the defense is going to argue. My client didn't have one speck of blood. They couldn't find blood in his apartment. They couldn't find blood in his car. They couldn't find blood on his clothes. They couldn't find blood on the sheets and the pillows. So how in the heck did my client do this? This is monumental evidence that he didn't do it. So that's what I'm saying. They need a lot more. They need a lot more. They still haven't convinced me yet. Although they're doing a good job, and they're doing a good job, I still feel they need that really strong evidence. To me, I need some blood that's somewhere found in his car somewhere, found somewhere in that house. There's some red stains that they found at the house, so I'm hoping to see if that comes back to one of the Idaho 4, and that's where they have nailed him, if they have that. And then they can now piece together all the other evidence that they have. Because at this point, the defense will work around all the little evidence that they have at this point that we know of. The only defense argument that this FBI agent says is to discredit the evidence and to say that it was transferred there by the police themselves, which of course depends on what substrate it was found on and if those cops were recently at the crime scene. And again, I disagree with this person, because the defense can argue, and Brian's going to argue, that he went to the parties there. There were tons of parties there. It's very evident. It was so evident that all the neighbors complained about it. There was a lot of police officers that came over there. There's body camera footage of it. We all seen that stuff. So I disagree with this guy. I think he's looking at it at a narrow standpoint. Brian's going to argue that he went to parties there. Duh. That's why he's going to say, that's how I got their DNA. I was sitting on the couch one day. We had drinks. I came there around 10 o'clock when they had the party. I stayed for about an hour, because they said every time he was over there, except for one time, he was always there late in the night, early morning hours. And what do we know? We know that's a big party house, and they have parties late in the night, early morning hours, all night. They're having parties. So he's going to argue all the 12 times he was there, it was for the parties, except for the one time he came during the day because he forgot something at the house. And then maybe he brought his knife and forgot his sheath, and he couldn't find it that night and left. Couldn't find it that morning and left. So again, there's so many ways he can wiggle his way out of the evidence. That's why I'm saying, once I find and we hear evidence, if we can hear them leak any type of evidence saying there was blood associated with the Idaho 4 found in Brian's car, in his house, in any of his items, now we're talking. Now there's no way Brian can argue that. There's no way he can argue that. That really puts him at the crime scene. As we stand right now, I still don't feel the sheath is strong enough. All that, I don't feel none of that, because he can argue all that stuff. We need to see that there's at least some blood, because the defense is, if there is no blood found that's associated with the Idaho 4, you better believe the defense is going to use that as one of their top arguments to say Brian wasn't there, because they'll say it's literally impossible for Brian to not have any speck of blood on him when that scene was literally flooded with blood all over the place. In fact, there was so much blood, it was leaking from the outside of the house. And my client had not one speck of blood on him that they could find. And if you don't find blood, then you don't find a conviction. That's what the defense is going to say. I'm just saying. Okay? That's what I'm just saying. So y'all let me know what y'all think. Let me know what you guys think. That's this stuff is just it's just a bunch of redundant stuff in the rest of this. Let's see what else they have going on here. I just think it was also disturbing, if he's found to be the one that did it, how he just went and resumed class per usual. That was very disgusting and callous. He went back to the school, grading the students' paperwork and all that after the fact. He's a very sick person. There's some sick, disgusting, perverted people out here. He's perverted too. Going over here harassing these girls on Instagram. Clearly, if the girl didn't respond to you, why would you keep responding to them? But that's his nature, guys. That's his nature. He just can't seem to take no for an answer. Seems like somebody else we know, right? A lot of people we know. You know, the young girl that we talked about before, Kim, that he kept harassing her and when she was in the 6th grade. Here, I'll show you guys a picture of her again to refresh your recollection of her. I just found it was a little disturbing how he messaged this girl, messaged one of the Idaho 4 girls repeatedly after she didn't respond. It's like common sense would tell you if number one, she didn't respond, and number two, you could see that she didn't read it, because on Instagram, you could look at the bottom and you can see if someone read your comment, your post, or your message. And clearly he could see all those times he was messaging one of the Idaho 4, they weren't responding to him. So for him to keep messaging shows his nature of being unable and not capable of accepting rejection, just like he did to this young lady in 6th grade here on the screen, who looks and favors 2 of the Idaho 4 victims, Kaylee and Maddie. The blonde hair, the kind of Barbie looks to her, has those perfect features, gorgeous eyes, all that. This is his type, like we talked about before. And when he tends to lock his eye on some woman, he cannot seem to take no for an answer. And he kept harassing this poor girl on the screen so much, she had to say, back off. So y'all, let me know what y'all think about this information. Do you think any of the items that were found in this search of Bryan's apartment, do you think it really nails the coffin for Bryan, or do you want to see more evidence that's going to really, really hold, really lock this guy in? You know what I mean? Lock him in. Let me see what y'all got to say. Hi, Natasha Hair-Scuffle. How are you, love? How are you? I think he thought he was smarter than anyone else. He was working on a master in criminal justice, sociopath. Hi, Shadia Nitch. I think he already had a master's. Didn't he already have a master's and he's working on his PhD? I think he's working on his PhD, but either way, like you said, Shadia, he sounds like, in my opinion, a sociopath, not really able to associate with people. Did you guys hear that other rumor? So there is another update about this case. When Bryan moved into his apartment at the university, his father accompanied him and helped him move in. And when his father was helping him move in, he talked to one of the neighbors and he asked the neighbor if the neighbor would be Bryan's friend. I find that to be quite disturbing. Bryan is a 28-year-old man, and the fact that he needed his father to ask a neighbor to be his friend, it's like, it reminded me of a kid in preschool, a little child in preschool, and you're like, okay, you little Johnny, you play with little Tommy over here, honey. You play with him today, okay? Bryan's a grown man. That's a red flag. The fact that his dad had to ask someone to be his friend, to me, is a red flag. You are a 28-year-old man. You should be able to make friends on your own. Why does your dad have to ask that? It's obvious to me the dad knew that Bryan had some antisocial issues and he was not capable of making friends on his own, and which explains why the father did that extra step of trying to ask a neighbor at the school, the campus, to be his friend. That's just weird. Clearly, the father knew something was wrong with his kid. He knew it. I mean, this guy had a history of issues. Looking at his profile that we looked at before, the Tappa Talk, you guys need to watch that video. Man, that talks about how disturbed his mind was, how he has no emotions, how he looks at humans as an organic sack of meat, how he's very cruel to his family and treats his dad like dirt. This man's a walking sociopath, psychopath, in my humble opinion. And again, a disclaimer is that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. I'm still not really convinced, guys, with all this evidence. I'm not convinced yet. Are you guys convinced? I feel, in my opinion, that he's guilty, but I don't feel it's enough evidence yet for the jury. I need them to find blood, y'all. Blood associated with the Idaho 4, because that scene was very bloody. And if they can't find any speck of blood, that's going to be favorable to the defense. I'm just saying. Hi, Teresa Brown. Hi, love. Welcome to the live. She said, finally caught a live. Normally listen on my way back to work. Love your research. Oh, thank you, my love. Thank you. Keep me on my toes and mind going. Oh, wonderful. I love it. We are the opinionators. That's what we do. We always using our mind to analyze everything. As a parent, your child, this should have been addressed before it gets so bad. Exactly, Teresa. Exactly. That's what we have been talking about. These parents know their kids. Apparently the father knew his kid enough to ask a student. Isn't this crazy, guys? To ask a student to be his 28-year-old grown man son's friend. Are you serious? I know. And I agree with Teresa. She said, we as parents need to pay attention and address issues before it gets this far. Exactly. She is so right about that. BRYAN could have been saved. There were red ink flags dating back to 2011 and even before that, when BRYAN talked about on the Tappa Talk all the issues he had, how he had no emotions, how he had demons speaking to him and hearing screaming in his head, and he was mean and cruel to his family. And when he saw his family, he look into their faces and see nothing. When he hugs his family, he feels nothing. Those were huge red flags of a developing sociopath who was on the verge of exploding one day in his life if he didn't get intervention. But it seems to me, based on the information out there about his parents, it seems like the parents were enablers. They coddled BRYAN. They spoiled this man rotten. In fact, they spoiled him so rotten, in my opinion, I think they're the one that provided the car, which is why BRYAN didn't get rid of that car, guys. He couldn't, because his parents bought that car. And then he probably, they probably helped him with his phone, and they drove this 28-year-old grown man all the way to Washington to help him unpack his little things because he wasn't big enough to do it on his own. And then the daddy asked a neighbor to beat his little boy's friend. Come on now, grow up now. That's the problem with the parents. They kept babying this boy. And I'm going to call him a boy because that's how the parents were treating him. That's why he was enabled and more empowered in who he was, because his parents accepted that disturbing behavior of his. So all it did was continue to feed the beast inside of this man, which in my opinion just exploded one day when he decided to carry out his psychotic, horrific, dark desires. In my opinion, y'all. In my humble opinion. Teresa says, when behaviors change in our children, we need to save them. Oh, you are so right, Teresa. I couldn't have said it any better. You are right. Parents have a responsibility, and parents see the signs. They know something's off with their kids. I've seen other parents come out and speak about their kids being problematic. For example, the kid that went and shot his school up, his parents and the parents that provided the gun, the parents that are being prosecuted for that, for providing the gun to their son. Well, the mother was telling one of her friends, I guess, because she used to have her horses be cared for by her friend. The friend testified in one of the hearings that his mother told her that she felt her son was weird. She's like, my son is weird and he doesn't have friends and all that. So she already knew her son had issues, but she just let it slide. And then she had the audacity to buy him a firearm. And he was all on social media talking about how he was going to shoot up his school and shoot up people. And the mom just ignored it. And she laughed when the school caught her and said he was drawing these pictures of guns and shooting people and blood and all that. And she just laughed about it. And she was like, don't get caught, son. You're not supposed to get caught. And then he goes out and shoots the whole school up. It's like, come on now. Parents know. They do know. So we got to hold these parents accountable. I'm just being real. I know some people don't want to hear that, because I know a lot of parents watch the channel and they're like, why are you blaming the parents? It's not the parents' fault. It's the kids. No, you have a certain responsibility. The word of God says, train up your kids in the way they should go. Do not spare the rod in your child rearing. That means God gives you a responsibility to raise up your children. He gives you the responsibility to closely watch your children and help them grow in morals and high principles. And if you see your kid is struggling mentally and they're not able to make friends on their own and do certain things, then it is your responsibility to step up to the plate and intervene. They should have said, son, your behavior is not acceptable. We are going to get you some psychological help. We're going to get you into therapy. We're going to get you into regular treatment until you can modify this behavior, because the things that you're writing about on these blogs are not normal and they're not acceptable. And we love and care for you, son. And we will always love you, but we want you to get help. But it's easy. It's the parents. They're so busy. They disregard the red flags, or they love their kid so much they don't want to admit that their kid needs help. So they just cover it up and just think, oh, if I keep spoiling my kids, it'll go away. But it doesn't. This guy was crying out for many years in all those different blogs he was writing on Tappa Talk, and nobody listened. A lot of times there was no likes or comments on his post. People ignored him. He even did a rap song about it. He did a rap song talking about he was going to unalive people, and the kid and the family would be heard about it, and how he was the devil. It was all there. All this stuff was you could literally predict that BRYAN would eventually explode one day if anybody was paying attention. But I don't think people were paying attention. I think people just ignored BRYAN, and he's used to being ignored and rejected, and he could no longer take it. And he decided to exert this force, this crime of passion that had been built up for years after years after years of repeated rejection from women that he desired and coveted, the Marilyn Monroe lookalikes, the beautiful blonde women that he adored and desired to have. But each and every one of them, in my opinion, rejected him, dating back to 6th grade. We just talked about that young lady that rejected him. So very disturbing, guys. Very disturbing. Teresa says, we've changed our behaviors. We need to save them. Even as enablers, we know not to be ignored. It could have been them. Exactly. It could have been them. It could have been. It could have been. You are so right. We hear about this a lot too, even with Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy talks about the issues he had, but he said, I grew up in such a loving family. He was basically spoiled and coddled by his parents. They literally had spoiled Ted Bundy. And, he just was able to continue to be enabled until he was empowered to cultivate those dark, sinister thoughts in his mind, because he never really had any form of discipline. It was just like his parents just kept spoiling him and giving him all this spoiling and adoration and babying him and coddling him. And that just further empowered him to say, embrace who I am. My parents love me and accept all this things about me that they could clearly see something's off about me. They know something off about their kid. They try to deny it, y'all. They try to deny it all the time, but they know the red flags. I'm just saying. They know the red flags. They do. But yeah, I still think this is disturbing. Like I was telling you guys before, we talked about this before, but I think we need to revisit it, because I think this was just a tipping point for BRYAN. He got so tired of being rejected, and he had an obsession with one of these girls. And I really think, guys, it was Kaylee. But I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say. I am very interested, because I know some of y'all think it was Maddie. Some people think it was Maddie. Some people think it was Zana. I still don't think it was Maddie or Zana. I don't. I think it was Kaylee, because Kaylee, to me, really fits the profile of the type of women that he's attracted to. Now I'm going to see if I can find, there's this article that I wanted to show you guys again, because I thought this article really laid it out, the evidence really in detail. Let's see. Where did it go? I just had it here. Hold on, y'all. Let's see if I can find it. I just lost it again. There is. It's funny when you have all these windows up and you be trying to figure out what you're looking for. So they were saying that BRYAN was allegedly spamming one of the Idaho 4 women, trying to ask him, how are you doing? Hi, how are you doing? And I think that was that final straw for him. The more she ignored him in his mind, and again, it's just in his mind what he thinks. He started having flashbacks of the time that the girl in the 6th grade, Kim Keeley, rejected him. He started thinking back to the Tinder date that rejected him, and all those other women at the bars that rejected him, especially the bars in Pennsylvania. He started having flashbacks thinking about all of that. And he was like, no more. No more. I'm going to seek revenge. That's what, in my opinion, what he said, y'all. That is my opinion. But here, let me, there's this article that I want to read, because I thought this article really laid it out. That was saying Idaho murder suspects BRYAN KOHBERGER allegedly spammed one of the victims' Instagram DMs report. And we talked about this yesterday, but I thought this article laid it out a little bit more clear. They said he slid into one of the girls' DMs several times, but she didn't respond. An unnamed investigator told People, basically, it was just him saying, hey, how are you? But he did it again and again. Again and again. He kept harassing. He couldn't accept no for an answer. And apparently that is common to what he did to the young ladies at the Pennsylvania bar. He just wouldn't accept no for an answer. That I think was really what tipped him off, because again, that's the same thing he did to the girl in 6th grade. This young lady here, when we talks about Kim Keeley. Here, she talked about it. His middle school's crush who rejected his advances. Same thing he did to her when he kept messaging her, or he kept sending her, guys. Oh, hold on, guys. Let's get this. Hold on. What is this? There we go. So he kept sending her a bunch of messages. Let's see right here. We can find that. Oh, she said her mother claims KOHBERGER, who was back then an overweight, awkward misfit, would become obsessive in his pursuit of her, regularly leaving love letters in her locker and telling her he liked her. He would always say, "Oh, Kim, I think you're very pretty," just like weird comments. And she'd say, "Oh my God, leave me alone." She didn't give him a time or the day. See, the same thing, he would do that back in middle school, guys. He never changed his behavior. He never did. He just kept, and he did the same thing to one of the Idaho 4 victims, kept messaging her repeatedly, even though she rejected him, y'all. The evidence is there. This guy never seemed to change his disturbing patterns. Okay, hi, Mom of Zach. Hi, love. She said, I'm torn between him being slighted for the last time by a woman and him just wanting to commit the perfect crime. Wanting to commit the perfect crime and get away with it. That's if he did it. Right. That is, you have a very valid contemplation that you're thinking of. Those are both valid points, though. So it's true. It's like there's two different theories you can go with. And I was with you with that, Mama Zach. I was the same way. I was kind of torn in between those two theories too. But what really tipped me over into the theory of him being slighted by the last time of a woman is just all the prior information we've been receiving from the different women that rejected him at the bar, the woman from 6th grade, and how his same pattern of repeatedly, obsessively messaging these girls, and then this woman rejecting him. And then also in conjunction with one of his previous friends and his friend's wife saying he never had a girlfriend. They never saw him have a girlfriend. Until this day, we haven't heard one woman come out and say she's been in a relationship with him. All those different pieces of evidence has tipped me over into the slighted for the last time by a woman theory. That's kind of where I kind of made my decision based upon the prior information coming out. But like you said, he could have still just wanted to commit the perfect crime, because you also have to think about the fact that he did that Reddit survey. So it seems like he was fishing for information about how he could commit the perfect crime. Like Mama Zach, her two theories, she's kind of in the middle between. Also considering the fact of how, in depth he studied these criminals, and, how in depth his studies was of criminal law or criminology. So yeah, Mama Zach, you have two valid points, girl. We're just gonna have to keep waiting and seeing. She says, has anyone who knows him apart from his family come forward to stand up for him at all? See, right, Mama Zach. Well, there was one friend that said that, even though he was an awkward, weird kid, they thought he was cool. And then the other girl, Casey, said he was always nice to her, but that he was just bullied her brother. So, I mean, we have that part of it. And then that friend that came out, I guess they did drugs together. The friend that talked about it, that they did drugs together. He said he never seen BRYAN ever disrespect a woman. But again, that guy only worked with BRYAN and did drugs with him. And that was several years ago, back in his youth. So we can't really take his word as, the gospel, because he doesn't know BRYAN in his current years. So girl, you make some valid points. I think only 2 people gave little specks of positive information about BRYAN. Other than that, most people are over here just tarnishing this guy. Well, actually, no, some of the neighbors, they talk about him. The neighbors that were at his university, they talk about him, but they said that he just talked a lot. They're like, he was a cool dude, but he just talked too much. Like one time he talked to this guy at in his neighborhood for like a full hour. And then he kept talking to the guy so much, the guy started to avoid him, because he was like, man, I got places to go. I don't have time to be talking to BRYAN for no hour. I got to go. Boy, bye. Mama Zach said, yeah, but she never said that she didn't believe he didn't do it. Right. You're right. She didn't. And she actually came out and said she believes the reason why he did this is to see if he could get away with crime, which goes back to your two theories. That one of your theories was that he was trying to do is to commit the perfect crime. And that would her analysis would fit into that theory that you have, the other theory you have. So you're right about that. Yeah, Casey did say she thinks, though, that Brian thinks he's going to try to figure out how to get away with this crime, which is why I feel like even though the authorities found all these items at Brian's house, which could be incriminating, I feel like they need to find just a speck of blood. Just let us know that they found blood that tests positive for one of the Idaho 4 at Brian's residence or in his car. If they find that, Brian's done. I don't care what type of excuse he tries to come up with. If they find blood, he's done. He's done. As it stands now, though, that he could wiggle his way out of all the evidence, and he's going to have a lot of fun with this case, trying to build up all these different theories, as we're already seeing. He's probably going to claim he was framed and all these other lies. Okay. So we shall see, y'all. All right. Thank you guys for joining me for this live. I enjoyed talking to you guys about this case that constantly keeps producing more and more different information, y'all, that just makes my mind boggle with just curiosity. All right, guys, have a wonderful day and a wonderful night with your family. Remember to be polite in the comments and please do not put any other YouTubers in our comment section. Respect the comment section and have a wonderful night, everybody. Take care.